Well, hi, I'm Courtney. Welcome to my channel where we discuss educational research one study at a time so that you can incorporate it into your practice. Today I'm sharing part 2 of Ending the Reading Wars, Reading Acquisition from Novice to Expert. If you've seen the first video, you know that it was all about the alphabetic code and that the research in this article was used in the Sold a Story news article that came out. I did a video on that, and there's also a podcast now too, which is really interesting. As a good researcher, I always love to go through the reference list and read what other researchers, or in this case a news reporter, has used to inform their own work. And so this is another deep dive through the reference list from there. The first video in this series was all about the alphabetic code and using phonics and letters and sounds to understand how to read. This video, though, is all about reading at the word level, so not having to sound out every single part of a word. And obviously we rely on the alphabetic code even as skilled readers. That's why it's fun to go to IKEA and sound out the names of furniture that we've never heard before, because we're using our understanding of phonics to try and figure out what this new novel word could mean. But there is a continuum that happens where we go from pronouncing sound by sound to being able to read almost instantaneously. And so the authors are exploring that in this section. How do we go from sounding out every single part of a word to just being able to glance at it and read it quickly? The authors explored a bunch of different computational models about how people read, and they were less concerned about what was in all of these models rather than what the models showed overall and what commonalities they had. And the authors said that amongst all the models, there were two things in common. The first way is that readers translate the spelling to sounds to understanding. Okay, so spelling, sound, meaning. The other way is that readers forego the sounds and they just go from spelling to meaning right away. So in the second model, there is a time when readers just forego phonology, basically. It's not an either or. Now, we rely on both of these processes when we're reading, which makes sense because we want to be able to read quickly for the words that we already know, but we need the ability to slow down and use the alphabetic code when we're coming across a new word that we don't know. And so our brains know how to turn that on and off as we read. Now, when we're going from spelling to meaning directly and we're foregoing the phonology, the spelling still really matters, because we have a lot of words in the English language where the spelling changes the entire meaning of the word. So for example, maid and maid, M-A-D-E, I made something, or M-A-I-D, I would like to hire a maid to clean the floor in front of me right now. All right, let's talk about orthography and independent reading. Independent reading is super valuable for students if they are actually reading independently, not just turning the page every few minutes, as we know they do. I feel like the authors really don't explore that, and that's why teachers and researchers need to connect more, because yes, obviously independent reading has a lot of cognitive work associated with it, but I think researchers maybe sometimes overestimate what independent reading looks like in a classroom and how many times a student has to go to the bathroom magically during independent reading time. Although I will say, if we look at motivation, perhaps if students were better at reading, they would enjoy independent reading more. So we'll have to think about that as teachers. Now, before I get into what the authors learned about independent reading, I will say I have in another video, I will try to link it below, where we talked about independent reading and how it does not need to be silent. Independent reading doesn't mean silent reading, and there is value in students saying, especially unfamiliar words, out loud. So keep that in mind when you're planning out how you're going to inspire actual focused independent reading in your classrooms. When students are reading independently and they're mapping their words out into make meaning, this happens in an item-based way. So students might have to slow down for words that are taking a lot more brain power to get through, and then they can speed through a lot of other words. So just because they're slowing down at certain parts of the text doesn't mean that they don't know how to read or what they're reading. It just means that that might be a section or a few words that are tricky for them. So when you're assessing students, you really need to look at the broader context of what they're reading and understand that stopping here and there isn't a bad thing. It's actually their brain doing the work that needs to happen. All of those assessments where students, did they self-correct, did they not self-correct? Give them time. They're working through it. They're practicing and they're trying to figure out what the word is and what it could possibly mean using the text that's in front of them. So I know we've all heard of those choose just right texts and hold up 5 fingers when you're reading a book, and if you get to a word you don't know, put a finger down, and by the time you get to no fingers, the book is obviously too hard and you shouldn't read it. And I understand the sentiment because we want students to be motivated to read, and it is not super motivating to be struggling through every single word. But there's not really research that says that if they're already motivated and they want to struggle through those words and really practice and try and map them out, that it's detrimental to their reading ability. So again, it's an item-based fashion. If all of the books they're reading are really cumbersome, then that could have an impact on their ability to comprehend later on, because they might be using up too much working memory, which we'll talk about in the next video. But if they're making it through just fine, it's painstaking to watch, but lots of things in the learning process are. Have you ever watched a toddler try to tie their shoes? All right, so we've talked about the importance of independent reading and that sort of self-teaching model, because students just need time to immerse with the texts that are before them and practice and gain fluency that way. Then the authors turn their attention to focusing on lexical quality. And lexical quality is basically students' understandings of words in their meanings. So what words are out there? They need to have the vocabulary. They need to know what words look like spelled out. They need to know what the meaning of those spelled words look like. And they need to know what the meaning of a word is, even if it's not spelled any differently, but it takes on a different meaning in a different context. So for example, the word park and part are only one letter apart, 2 totally different meanings. Learning the beginning PAR does not help you solve the rest of the word in terms of its meaning for park versus part. But park and park have the same word and can mean 2 very different things as well. One, I'm going to park my car, and the other one, I'm going to go play at the park with my friends. And so that lexical quality really comes into play with students being able to understand what it is they're reading. Again, building lexical quality happens in an item-based fashion, and your own experiences can really influence the stores of knowledge that you have. So if you play baseball, you might have a whole host of vocabulary related to baseball that not everyone else has in your classroom. So you might be able to read through something about baseball and know exactly what it means a lot quicker than other people who are stumbling through the words and trying to make sense of the words that are in front of them. Knowing about words and what those words look like in print, so lexical quality, is really important to build, because later on it will free up working memory for students to focus on comprehension. So building rich vocabularies for students and talking about the ways that words change meanings over in different contexts is really influential to how they will be able to comprehend text later on down the road. Now, when we're learning to spell, we can use our base knowledge of how words come together and extend it to really have a spiral effect or a domino effect on our ability to spell other words. So if we know the word hat, we can probably figure out how to spell cat, or even the word hatch, because it's hat and it's part of the word. This doesn't work for meaning though. If we go back to the part and park example, knowing that park is P-A-R-K and knowing that part is P-A-R-T, and the beginnings are the P-A-R, that it doesn't help us at all. They have 2 totally different meanings and they're not connected at all. So the connection happens for spelling, but it doesn't happen for meaning. And we might take that concept for granted as teachers, but if you're new to the English language, or you don't have a rich lexical quality or a lot of experience with the background knowledge that you're trying to work in here, there can be a desire to make those kind of jumps. Well, I see how this is pretty much the same word except for 1 letter. Surely they have some kind of a meaning, and they don't always. But if we look to morphemes, then we can start to get that doubling up effect like we can with spelling. So part and park, they don't have much in common. But if we start adding prefixes and suffixes to words, then we can start to get some understanding of meaning in the words that we are reading. So remember, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a word. So all of the base words and then all of their prefixes and suffixes. So if we know the word bright and we know the suffix est, we can do brightest, and we know that that's the most bright. And we can extend that there to fast. We know the word fast, and we know est, fastest, which means you are the most fast. And so that can help students propel their knowledge and really enhance their lexical quality as we go through. Now, the English language is considered to be morphologically sparse, and even with it being morphologically sparse, 80% of the words we encounter are built from more than one morpheme. So, as teachers, here is a huge opportunity for us to leverage that information. We need to be doing word study with students that focuses on adding prefixes and suffixes to words, talking about what they all mean and how that changes the meaning of words and how we can extend that information to new words that we haven't encountered yet. It's super helpful for students to know that the word music is in the word musician, which is a tricky word to spell. But if we understand that morphological information, then we can make big gains, and we can have a reminder for students on how to spell words and how to analyze words that we haven't read before to figure out what they mean. So let's work smarter, not harder. Now, the assessments for morphological awareness tend to be oral assessments. So you would say, I teach, so I am a teacher, and they understand to put the ER on the end. Or the word that we're going to use today is watch. Yesterday, I watched, and add the ED on TV. I am going to watch a show. We are watching, and then students can add in the correct ending when you provide the base word there. And the success on these oral tasks is linked to better reading comprehension in later primary grades. Now, if you're wondering when the optimal age to talk about morphology and really get into those kinds of details is, the researchers have got you covered. They show that between the ages of 6 and 10, morphology lessons really shine for students, and between the ages of 7 to 11, students can really do a great job of analyzing morphology through letter strings. Now, every country has different grades that match up to different ages. Where I would be starting this kind of stuff in about grade 1 and carrying it through all the way till grade 4. Now, the authors talk about using morphology in the early years, and they show that in most of the decodable books that students read, morphemes aren't a huge part of the learning beyond the base words. So the books tend to say I sit instead of I am sitting. And so students don't necessarily need that information in one-on-one reading instruction or small group reading instruction, but they do need it in read alouds because it has a cumulative effect later on. So when you are reading to the students and you come across more complex vocabulary like sitting, standing, walking, running with the ing on the end, or past tense and things like that, then point it out to your students and really capitalize on those opportunities. The authors note that because morphology instruction is so important, it should be explicitly taught during your writing time, and that it should link up with your reading. So really invest in it during your writing block and showing students how to spell different words and how to create different meanings with different morphemes. And then that will also, again, because it's spelling, it will serve reading as students go forward. Now, the authors do note that teachers don't have a great understanding of morphology and how to instruct it, and that's because it hasn't been taught in teachers' colleges. So we are not going to harp on teachers for not knowing this stuff because it was never taught to them and it was never valued by school boards. It's just coming back into fashion now that we should be doing this, and we should actually be looking at the research as to how we should be teaching students, rather than buying really expensive reading kits that focus on whole language and teach kids nothing. So it is not the teacher's fault that we do not have great understanding of morphology. But this is an area where faculties of education should be investing some money and hiring some people or adopting some programs focused on it. And principals, if you have, or whoever runs PD for teachers, this is an area that's worth shelling out a few dollars for, so that teachers can build this up for themselves and then transfer it over to their students. All right, so now that we have an understanding that we need to start with phonics and then move into word reading, we know that spelling, sounding out, and gaining meaning from that process is super important. We know that students need a lot of time for independent reading and that reading has to actually happen. And we know that it's important to really work towards building high lexical quality for our students, as well as explicitly teaching morphology during our writing lessons. We also need to devote a bit of time to encouraging students to be motivated to read. When students are more motivated to read, they're more likely to read. And reading ability has a cumulative effect where the rich get rich and the poor get poor. So we need our students to be reading a lot. How do we do this? Glad you asked. The authors wanted to know as well. Interestingly enough, rewarding them is not the answer. Rewarding children for reading actually has a negative effect on their motivation. So get rid of the sticker charts, no more free pizzas if you read. It has to come from within. Children have to want to read, and they have to want to read more than any other option available to them. So on one hand, we can restrict their other options, and on the other hand, we can really make it enticing for students. So by restricting other options, we can take away things that are not reading. So screen time only comes out after whatever time of the day. Here's a bunch of books. But we also need to give options so that if students have downtime, there's a book available. So it's really boring sitting and waiting in line. Oh, but look, you have this book in your hand and you can just read while we wait. Another way to motivate them to read is to make sure that they have books that they like and that are interesting to them, that are interesting to their friends, some peer pressure for the win, and that serve them. So if it's a book about a topic that they're really interested in or about a video game that they really like playing, that can help motivate them as well. Finally, children are more motivated to read when they know how to read. So that comes all the way back to using a systematic phonics program to start students off on the right foot and making sure that we're doing everything we can to teach them to read. Nobody wants to spend time doing something that they're really, really bad at. So we need to give them the skills they need to get good enough that they can start taking on reading as their own activity and feel like it's valuable to them and that it's something that they're good at. Literacy really does beget literacy, and teachers, you have got your work cut out for you. I do as well, but hopefully with some sound information, we are leveraging the research and not wasting our time using techniques that aren't actually valuable for our students. So good luck to you all. I know you can do it. Stay tuned for the next video because we're going to be talking about the next phase of reading, which is all about comprehension. If you haven't seen the video about cracking the alphabetical code, I will have everything linked in a playlist in the description box for you so that you can check that out as well. Thank you for learning along with me today. Please feel free to share this video with any teacher friends you have that might find this information useful. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can not only get my videos sent to you, but so that YouTube remembers that teachers care about research. Have a great day. Bye.